Welcome to the ATA podcast, where we talk to former elite athletes sharing their insights and wisdom derived from successfully transitioning into life beyond the game. A very warm welcome to the Athlete Transition Accelerator podcast. And I'm delighted to be joined, as usual, by my co-founder, Carl, and also by ex-Scotland international professional rugby union player, Nick De Luca. Now, Nick, as with all of our guests, we're here to talk about life beyond the game. We're talking about how you took that step from the very, very pinnacle of rugby union into the next chapter of your career. But I'd always like to start off by just a nod to that special chapter in your life. Obviously, you played 29 caps for Scotland. You've played in World Cups. I'm always curious if you look back over that career and you could pull out one or two highlights that give you that sense of pride that you look back on with the fondest of memories. What comes to mind for you when I position that question to you?
Well, not to be a stickler for stats, but 43 caps, but that's fine.
Was it really? Well, that's my apologies right off the bat. So that's the website I looked at.
But
It's
it's
out of
okay
date.
because as James Haskell says, every one for Scotland is only worth every three for Scotland's only worth one of English caps, so it's about
Right,
17 or
nice.
something.
Yeah.
Highlights interesting. You know, I was very fortunate to play for over 10 years, um, three different clubs, including in France, England, and Scotland, and bizarrely, I didn't enjoy a huge amount of my career. And you've got to search for those highlights. It tends to be the impact you've made on other people. That's kind of the big thing. So when you hear stories of how much you helped them, I really enjoy that. But in terms of on the playing front, obviously, I was fortunate to play in the Commonwealth Games for sevens, a World Cup in New Zealand, which was just incredible. And most of the real highs tended to be on tour. Um, Often away from Murrayfield, whether it be the successful one in Argentina where we're undefeated, or in Australia where we beat them. But I think the biggest win in the dark blue was Ireland's last game at Croke Park, where it was over 100,000 mad Irishmen screaming and women, and managing on their last game to beat them was incredible, and to kind of spoil the party, which you know, everyone to enjoy the game and love it, but for us that was a really big occasion. And then club wise, being part of the Wasps squad, even though I didn't play much to get to the Premiership final my last year, I loved that. I just learned so much from the people I was around, and that's when I started falling back in love with the game, which has got me into the career I'm in today.
Yes.
So that was a big moment as well.
And I get a sense something we're going to come on to when you talk about helping people, which aligns, I know, when we start to talk about where you are now, that will have relevance. How did you find playing in France, out of interest?
So I would live in France at a drop of a hat. I loved it. I loved the
Yep.
people. I was very fortunate to be in Biarritz. So in terms of my lifestyle, the sea, the sand, the mountains just in the background, the food, as I said, the Basque people couldn't have been friendlier. Like you hear horror stories of, although, you know, France is difficult to go and play in, difficult community, your partner won't be welcomed. I found the opposite true. I was just blown away by the hospitality and the warmth of the people, and I'm still in touch with some now, even though I was only there for a short 2 years, almost 10 years ago. Wow. Um, but yeah, I loved it. The rugby though wasn't as probably didn't do my homework. Biarritz was very much a forwards dominated team historically, and always was, and we're trying to continue that. So I still remember one guy coming on a bus, and he'd been bitten quite badly around the finger, and my French was okay. It wasn't great till the end. So I'm trying to have this conversation about what's happened, and I couldn't understand what he was saying, why he was laughing so much. And eventually, one of the other guys who spoke English and French explained to me. He said, "It's all right." He said, "He's okay because at the time his finger was knuckle deep in another guy's eye socket, so he deserved getting bitten." I was like, "Oh, geez, this is not the world I'm used to."
Yeah,
So yeah,
it's a
it was
very
quite
different.
different.
Very different. I spent a bit of time playing in France, and I think the people are super when you make the effort, when you ingratiate yourself
Yes.
to them, and you settle
Yeah.
into the culture. But yet, it's one of the only places in the world where certain things like the eye gouging and what have you is still considered, part of the game. A bizarre one, but
Yeah.
some fabulous memories there. And as I said, I think it's important to set the context because you're obviously very humble. You've rolled off a number of high profile achievements, and over the course of 10 years for anybody in professional sport, but particularly the competitive nature of rugby, to be there for that long at that level over a period of 10 years is to your credit.
10
Yeah,
years,
thank you. Yeah,
incredible.
very fortunate to be robust enough to get through it. Rugby's still, yeah, who knows what's going to come of it? Who knows what state my brain is in long term? But I think the SRU looked after us really well. I didn't feel, pressure to play or forced back too early. I had a few 6-month injuries out with my head, and they were very supportive throughout that process. So fingers crossed the game does survive, because it's got wonderful strengths to it as well as the dangers.
Absolutely.
Yeah, completely agree. So, following a very successful rugby career, you mentioned briefly coaching. What is it you've moved into? What is it you're doing now?
Oh, big question. So I like to think, I call it kind of making a difference, helping people, change their lives, be better people, understand themselves better. And I use the vehicle of sport and coaching to be able to do that. My job title, uh, my full-time job as such is Director of Sport and Activities at an independent school. This is my second role like this since I've left rugby. And my own stuff is coaching people. So it'd be called executive coaching, but I don't see it as probably business-like. I do coach leaders, but a lot of it is about self-leadership, understanding yourself, your mindset, your wants, desires, and motivations. And look, you go through this world only once, and I want to try and leave a positive impact. Do I get it right all the time? No, of course not. Like, especially with my own children, I'm still terrible. But you just try and make a difference. When I was transitioning out of rugby, I just said yes to every opportunity I could, and I found that a really useful way of figuring out where you wanted to be. And my first degree was sports science, and then I did an MBA while I was still playing, thinking a well-trodden path was into the city for rugby players. And I just got in the city a few days, did a few work experiences, spoke to a lot of people, got offered a few things here and there, but I decided it just didn't feel right at the time. And I realized actually by saying no, I might be closing that door forever. But I thought, you know what, I'm going to give education, coaching, working with young people in this instance a go. And yeah, I've been in that now for, this is year 8 or year 7, a long time. Yeah.
So just picking up on that, Nick, because I got a sense. Obviously, we've done a bit of research, and the official stats were wrong, but some of the other bits were right in terms of where you're spending your time. And you made a comment right off the bat when we talked about the highlights of playing, that legacy impact, if you will, of enjoying helping people. So it aligns very much with what you're doing now, helping the students, helping people through your coaching. What sort of clarity did you have about this as a career path? You just mentioned something there about closing the door on certain things. Was this something that you were aware of as you were playing, and you started to plan for this? You've
So,
mentioned doing MBAs, or is it something that's
I
evolved
think I think
post
I think
playing?
when you're young, yeah, when you're younger, and rightly so in some ways, you feel invincible. So when you're a young man, and if you know anything about the neurology of the brain, actually, I think my chimp part was dominant for longer than my prefrontal cortex, my thinking part. So I don't think I built good relationship with people around me. I don't think I understood the impact that I was having on other people as I chased down my dream, and was quite single-minded about that, and obviously managed to achieve it. And it was probably through negative experiences and trying to figure out what was going on that you noticed the difference you could have, and you could make to people's lives. And I still like the Maya Angelou quote about people forget what you did and what you said, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. And I try and bring that to the forefront of what I do, because it's never come naturally to me. But actually, I think it is possibly the most important thing, kind of what's the most important thing, the destination or the journey. And someone else said, well, actually, no, it's the company you have on the journey. So I'm kind of trying to live a bit more by that, an area where it's not been as I said before. So as sportsmen, we can be quite selfish, because we have to be, or we convince ourselves we have to be, and quite single-minded. It was only towards the end of my career, and I was like, okay, I'm not invincible. I'm getting old now, that I start having conversations and thinking about where else can I go. But I don't think I really understood my strengths, what I was about, and what I wanted to achieve. I kind of stumbled across it. I still get people in touch from a previous school who are now feeling a bit lost.
Right.
And a lot of people talk about kind of a North Star, or a big audacious goal. And I find life's very easy when you have that. So when I had my purpose as a rugby player, decision making's easy. Behaviors are easy. Like your life just aligns neatly. Now, when I'm not sure professionally what I want to be, I find it far easier to think about, well, who do I want to be and what's the impact I want to leave? And then the job is just a vehicle for that. So I can do that in my current world. I could do that if I was working in Tesco's down the road. I could do that as a doctor or as a working on the bins. You can still make a difference to people. You can still add value where you can. So I found that quite freeing as opposed to having to be worried about the job itself, but actually what's the impact you want to leave on the world.
No, it's a lovely articulation, Nick. And I think it's very common, the point you alluded to at the start of that about feeling invincible as a younger player. I think that's part of the pros and the cons of you need that ruthless mindset in elite sport to succeed. But the harsh reality, and thankfully you managed to avoid it, but those career-ending injuries can occur. And so what we're always trying to encourage people to do is, yes, you hope you don't need to be actually transitioning out of sport for a significant period of time, but it's wise to start preparing and looking at what you like, what you don't like, so that if the worst case was to happen, you're not starting from a standing start. And that your point here of how you've developed and evolved that is very powerful. But also something else you said I think is powerful, where you looked at that well-trodden path and you recognized it wasn't for you and you were closing a door. And I think that's important as well. And was that just going back to that, was that going into the sort of financial sector when you're saying that well-trodden path to the city?
Yeah,
What
yeah,
was
it was yeah, a lot of kind of property is a big trodden path for people out of my professional sport. I'm sure it is for most because they have liquid, they have cash and leverage in the early days, and into the financial sector, which I have various friends now. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that career, and that's really important. It's not for me to add judgment to someone else's
no?
life. It's just for me, it didn't feel like I was going to get enough out of it. Um, didn't speak to me. So I looked at both things and the consultancy world, which I'm still involved in and doing, but I've gone about it a different way and gained my own expertise in a second world as well. So when I'm talking about leadership or self-leadership, then actually I've got a good volume of experience and knowledge from the sporting world and now the professional world. I think you alluded to before, kind of as a young man, the arrogance of and feeling invincible and not preparing yourself. I was probably one of the last cohorts as such still to go to university before turning professional. So I was very fortunate to have a degree behind me. Now the world is changing. Is a degree the way forward? I think there needs to be more robust conversations about pathways and where you're going to get to on that. But I was fortunate that my mum and dad said, well, if you want to go to Edinburgh and play rugby, then you will be going to university.
Right.
Now I ended up with a 2-2 because it wasn't a focus for me, but I came with something. Then actually, I probably did my MBA just to prove to myself I was clever. So again, I talk about not wasting the grief, and a lot of the kids we work with here, we want to share our stories so that they don't have to repeat our mistakes. However, we all tend to because a lot of us are experiential learners.
Yeah. Well said.
Gee, I tell you, you've hit on some incredibly important topics. We could talk for hours about some of this stuff. James and I, we've had quite a few conversations, and a lot of what you've touched upon keeps coming up as issues. But one of the things I just want to dig into, you mentioned that you'd said yes to a lot of different opportunities.
Yeah.
While you were playing and you were in this professional world of rugby, how did you find fitting all of these yeses in and going out there and experiencing different industries?
I think again, it's understanding the other side of the coin. So as rugby players, you probably think you're really busy, but you'll never not be as busy like that again. The volume of time you have as a professional athlete is incredible, and I would encourage people to use that time. Now that doesn't mean physically use it, but cognitively and building relationships and understanding. So when I was at Wasp in particular, coming back, the RPA were fantastic. And the player development manager there, Chris Bell, presenting opportunities to boys, whether it be a bricklaying course or direct rugby course or coaching opportunities. You really did an opportunity to go and try things. And even when James, you were saying you're in coaching, that Jahari window of the unknown to yourself and unknown to others, you don't know if you might be fantastic at something because you don't even know the job exists. So the more yeses, the more experiences you can get, and fantastic. And even if that creates 100 no's, then when it does come time to retire, you know where you don't want to go. because very fortunate when I was playing rugby, and you know, I didn't earn anything to the level of a lot of the English players or the high enders, but I did very well. I was capable of living a life I needed, and I could have changed careers or even taken some time off. When you're then in the real world, and I'm in the real world now with a family of three, you don't have that luxury to try things. It's very difficult, and that's why I said, so once I closed that door, once I then decided I'm into this world, I'm going to be on a teacher's salary. I'm going to have to use my savings wisely and manage my life. I can't then say, you know what, this isn't for me. I need to take 6 months off. I'm going to go try things. I'm going to go travel. I'm going to go experiment in this world, that world. So while you have that luxury of time, which you do as an athlete, and I'd imagine you can only train so much in a day, regardless of your sport, go and use it. Go and build relationships. Try things. And as I said, like, get as many no's as possible, because then at least you're narrowing it down to what might be your yes.
And that's really powerful, Nick, because sometimes it's a difficult subject to broach without sounding like you're the judgmental, wizened old player. You know, when we talk to people and say you've got more time than you think, it's very, very powerful for guys like yourself that have played at the top level to say, use that time wisely, because you've got to recover. Absolutely. There's an intensity that you're doing on the field or in the gym. You have to recover. But there's a difference between the odd coffee here and there and a bit of downtime with Netflix or, you know, the PlayStation, and that being the default setting for hours and hours and hours. And I think a lot of things can be done without it being physically taxing. As you say, building relationships, speaking to people, developing contacts, having a Zoom call, you know, researching, reading, learning about different things. It doesn't have to be physically draining. But to use that time wisely is a really powerful message that I love to hear from guys like you that have walked the path, because I think that's one of the blind spots, which again ties back into the sort of naivety of youth and that ruthless, I'm invincible, I'll be okay. So hearing that repeatedly from senior guys like you say, are you using your time wisely? I think that's a really powerful message.
I think importantly as well, it doesn't have to be tiring things. It can be things that you're passionate about. There's a lot of people now are using their capital to be entrepreneurs, to come up with business ideas that work for them. So it can be energizing. And from my point of view, I remember even one autumn test, I was running the charity calendar for Edinburgh, so something we created, and we ended up raising over £40,000 for Maggie's. And that was taking up a lot of my headspace. Now you think, therefore, it would take away from my rugby, but it gave me something else. Rugby wasn't everything. I actually had a different thing going on that I had to think about and switch off from rugby. And as I was playing badly or coming through, as I said, up until 24, rugby was everything. 25, it was my whole identity. So it actually hampered my performance because I didn't want to challenge my identity by playing badly or pushing or stretching myself. Whereas if you can have these other parts to you, then rugby is just part of you. It's not everything. And I think France do that really well in the program called the Espoirs, which is the word for hopefuls. They're only allowed to train half a day. They're not allowed to do the full thing. They have to go and either then go to college, university, or work a job. And I remember the end of my first year out there, Dos Santos, wonderful second row from the Basque Country, really good player in the Espoirs, had just been offered a contract, and he said, "Not for me." Said, "I'm really enjoying working in the bank. I'm gonna continue that pathway."
Right.
I was like, "Wow, that's amazing."
Yeah.
So actually, you don't know. We all think we want to be, ask my under 13s here, hands up, who wants to be a British Lion? And, everybody's got their hand up, and the chances are none of them will be. It's just it's because what you see, whereas hopefully you want to expose them to lots of other things, whether it be sports or opportunities where they can see themselves there as well. So you've got to see it to believe it. So yeah, get out there and do things that you're passionate about.
Exactly. And again, it's like it's so powerful. I know I'm reiterating some of this back to you, Nick, but what a great sort of second point. You took the words right out of my mouth. That how you free yourself of some of that mental stress and some of that pressure when you're sitting in your own thoughts, reviewing performance endlessly. There's a healthy element of review, but there's a point where it can certainly become destabilizing and debilitating. So to be able to clear some of that mental pressure and to clear some of that stress, it's the same for any of us in any walk of life. To be able to take your focus away from one thing and put some creativity and energy into another, you often return back to that original thing. And sportsmen are no different. You return refreshed and re-energized. So I think you've encapsulated very articulately the physical benefits and the mental benefits of having other interests, but also that preparatory work for the transition. So if we come actual to the transition itself, when you actually retired then, Nick, obviously you're an intelligent chap. You've spent a bit of time thinking about this. You've looked at things that are right or not right. You've had the benefit of some study, university, etc., the MBA. How was the actual transition? Because I don't want to put any words in your mouth, but it's different for everybody. The point at which you stopped being Nick, the professional rugby player, and turned the page and stepped into that next chapter. How was that process for you?
Memory is a weird thing, so I don't always trust memories, but I'll tell you what's in my head today. I'd actually officially retired in France, and Wasps was a late in the day thing, and I was like, you know what, I do want to try it. Let's roll the dice. So I kind of mentally had started preparing, and then I was in the very much in the bibs for Wasps and helping prepare the team for the weekends. And we had a wonderful second team as such, and really enjoyed that. And that's where I learned a lot and started getting into the coaching side. Now, my last day at Wasps was the grand final in the stands, not playing, but in the grand final, and then going on the pitch and helping condolence the boys who just lost an unbelievable match, but just so proud of them for the whole season and being part of that. To then on the Monday straight into the real world. So I didn't give myself much transition time, and then I worked for a month in a school called Uppingham as director of rugby, and they were fantastic. That first month, there was plenty of support, and I was basically just doing some rugby coaching, just coming in and being with the first team as we're heading off to France, back to Biarritz, bizarrely, that summer. And I think Johnny Wilkinson alluded to or talked about in one of his podcasts, kind of we're looking to charge into, when rugby's everything, you're looking to plug in, and that's the only place you can get your fix again. So I think in some ways I've never had to go cold turkey as such, because I'm still getting a fix of rugby, and that's good or bad, who knows, but that's what it is. So I'm in with a group. The year before I was playing with kids who are 18 in the A-League. I'm now coaching kids who are 18. So it's not that dissimilar, just in a different environment. So it felt okay, to be honest, that initial month. And then July came, and that's when it kind of hits you. And basically you go through the process of grieving. I actually started to grieve the loss of a life and a career and an identity. So suddenly it is very different. You lose so much, not just that kind of the easy ones are the financial, the status, the fame as such, limited obviously for a Scottish player, but you lose your social networks, you lose your routine, you lose your purpose, and it was really challenging. And I remember driving up to meet my family at Centre Parks to kind of mark my retirement. And I'd been working, they were already up there, and I drove up, and I just like, God, I need to just cry. So I put on some bagpipes
Right.
on the Highland Cathedral, which always gets me, still does. The bagpipes here, it gets me, and I just had a really good cry, and it felt really good. And then you feel better, you get going, and off you go. But I've gone from a world where I'm really selfish, looking after only myself, to then a world where at that school there's 800 kids, and you're at the bottom of the queue, and you're looking after everybody else. So I think it was the October, but again, memories, a fuzzy thing. October or December, I went to my line manager and said, I think I'm done. I don't think I can keep going. I'm up at 5, working, catching up on stuff, and then I'm on the computer till 10, and during the day I'm coaching 5, 6, 7 hours. And at the time I was teaching as well. So I just can't. It can't be done. It's not.
Right.
It's not possible. And I actually went back into the city, spoke to a few more people, got a few more kind of leads. And I don't remember the reason why, but I was like, let's stick with it. Let's give it a go. And then after about 6 months, 9 months, you start coming out the other end. And I'm finding in the professional world, a lot of people expect things to not to come easy. They expect other people to be up to scratch soon, and also a lot of pressure on ourselves to be smashing it. But even though I'd done the job before and I've come to a new school, I think it still took me 6 to 9 months to understand the organizational context, the organizational knowledge, and to get competent in my role, even though it's very similar. Um, so yeah, I think if you are transitioning, find the support around you so you can look after yourself and where you get your energy from. But also you do have to give it time. Um, we're in a culture that's harsh. It's very easy now to move on, whether it be your dating apps, which terrify me, where people swipe left, swipe right, find someone new. They're not willing to work at anything. And same in industry and our jobs and our life. We still need to, as we do as rugby players, you need to commit. You need to go all in and give it a real chance before just moving on, because life's tough. It's just which toughness do you want to choose?
Yeah. Wow. I really appreciate, Nick, your candor on that is very, very powerful. Cal, my mind's fizzing. I've got a million questions, but I feel like I'm hogging the mic here. So I'm going to throw
No,
it
don't
back to
worry.
you because I think there's a number of things that Nick's touched on there that we can explore further.
Yeah, he's done it again. There's so many avenues that we could take this down. You mentioned it took 6 to 9 months to sort of work through all of the grievance and all of the steps that you go through. Were there sort of any skills or traits that you picked up through your time as a professional athlete that helped you go through that transition? And of those skills and traits, what do you think are serving you now in your day-to-day role?
Okay, so skills you talk about kind of that serve you. I think everybody's different, but I faced what I would call highs and lows in my career, and actually knowing that being able to rely on that mindset and that resilience and know that you can get through tough times is important. Um, we're very quick to try and remove people from hurt, struggle, challenge, or we can be too quick to remove that from people. But actually, it's through those experiences, through that stress, and coming out the other side where we build resilience. So I feel like I have that resilient side to me. A big part of that was when I was struggling with rugby and my identity. I did a lot of work on my own identity and who I am and what I'm about, so I could lean into my own origin stories, my own values, and kind of play to my strengths in that sense. So understanding, oh no, this is who you are, this is what you're about. You're hardworking, you're brave, you're resilient. What does that look like? Right, this is what it looks like tomorrow. Let's go, crack on. Similar to the mindset from sport as well. You have a North Star. You want to get to a World Cup. You want to be a winning Scot. But if you look in the future, then actually it can be quite daunting. It can be too big to digest. So that ability to come back just to the next step. So kind of, well, actually, can I survive another day? I'm able to wrap around what's important tomorrow and square that away instead of worrying about what's got to be done for the whole year. Can I get through the next day? Can I get through the next thing? And just making sure my being far more organized in terms of the planning and organization and preparation, because I've gone from a place where everything was spoon fed to me to now a world where I was running 15 fixtures at a weekend, booking the opposition, the teams, the buses, the catering, and being like, oh my days. and the 90 members of staff or the 100 member of staff that involved in the program as well. So it was very different, and just appreciating that, when you started your rugby career, you couldn't smash it and you had to go through a process. This is just that process. So ultimately, that what we're talking about there is mindset. So we get to create our beliefs, and our beliefs shape how we feel and therefore how we behave and act. So having a real good understanding of the mindset and what I'm telling myself and what I can focus on, the controllable, what we speak about. So yeah, just understanding, right, where do I need to be? What do I need to focus on? What can I get out of this? The other thing is really useful. I went through some mental health first aid training as well before I arrived, because when I was in a boarding school, I was like, I don't know what I'm doing ultimately, and I worry I'd miss some stuff that were obvious, and then I can't do anything about it when, if a child was that depressed or suicidal that I missed something, I'd really struggle to live with myself. So through some training, then I was able to then train staff. So that gave me a certain awareness and skill set in terms of resilience and what I needed to do. Part of that was actually mapping out your social support when I was delivering the course and going out, who do you turn to in good times and bad times when you solve a work problem, when you've got this crisis, that, and actually for me, too many of those persons was the same person, which was my wife, and I was relying too heavily on them. So I was able to kind of reach back out to some friends, to some peers from previous days to kind of help support me. And again, as you mentioned at the start, Carl, the well-trodden path, some other people that were already in this world, to speak to them about their transition and to normalize it, because we've got this way of creating a unique world that we think we're only living in ourselves, and it's really tough and it's horrible and it's only my experience, but actually when you look up and speak to other people, it helps normalize it.
Yeah.
And then say, okay, this is part of that. This is part of the process. You will get through it. The sun will come up again.
And I think that's another great phrase for people listening, to normalize this. You've talked very eloquently there about the struggles going from what we hear repeatedly, that loss of structure, that loss of identity is a big one that you've articulated there. Being candid enough to say, yeah, have an emotion, release those emotions, have a cry, and that it takes time. But then I think recognizing that you've got the strength to get through it. So you've alluded to something there, that a lot of elite athletes will have very, very high levels of resilience. They've had to come back from injury, adversity. Let's be candid, in the modern world, you're in a very, very ruthless goldfish bowl now as a high performing elite athlete. Everybody's got an opinion, be it the old fashioned print media, digital media, now with social media. You have to be resilient to keep moving forward. And I also love the point you made there around expanding your support network, because a lot of men particularly are too insular. They don't want to put their fears or their anxieties on anyone else. They overly lean on their wife perhaps, or perhaps don't even do that. They just internalize it. And hearing you say it's important to look at expanding that, to look at who's walked before you, listen to interviews like this, go and talk to people who have retired, reach out, talk within your network. It might not be someone you know directly, but someone knows someone else who can make an introduction, because that word normalize is really important. I haven't met anybody yet that steps off elite performance and the next day they're absolutely fine. We recently shared an interview with Dan Carter talking about how much he struggled with the loss of identity. So knowing that those problems are going to come, then take the steps that you've alluded to here. Who can I talk to? Who can I learn from? How can I, reflect on the strengths that I've got to get me through this? So I think it's very pertinent, Nick. And the reason I keep pulling things out and throwing it back out there is it's easy just to let this wash over you. But you struggled. You'd been at the top for 10 years. So that is perfectly acceptable for people to hear. It's difficult. The transition is not an easy transition. You touched on something else, finance. Very few people step out from an elite level at finance and can continue, but the pressures are still there, still have a mortgage, still have dependents, still have children or partners. So preparing for that step is another important part of what we spend a lot of time talking to people about.
I think you talked a lot there in terms of the identity as well, and how I'm transitioning out. It's kind of in the AA, they talk about, I am an alcoholic, and you're always an alcoholic. You always, that's part of you now. I think I'll always be a professional athlete, and I'll always be, I don't think it might never be at fully peace in another world, because it was all I knew for 33 years. So for the first 3 or 4 years after I retired from Scotland, I really struggled to watch them,
Right.
because I know the kind of person I want to be, but when I was watching those games, I didn't want them to do well. I was like, I didn't want them to go and experience stuff which we really struggled to experience in the dark blue of Scotland. So you're torn and you're pulled, and it's only the last few years actually I can go, but I'm still nervous about it, still worried about it. I'm still not having that first drink. It's actually, I'm never been an alcoholic, and I'm not trying to belittle or simplify that, but that's almost how I see it, is in terms of it's always a work on. It's not like after 5 years you've transitioned and you're done. It's always something to be revisiting and challenging and understanding as we're on this bizarre journey of life.
And did you find, because that's again another wonderful piece of candor from you that people might say, but I've heard that, I've experienced, when you're injured, it's that old mentality of, well, you wish the team well, but is the person playing in your position going to have a man of the match, have a blinding performance? Did you find that I suppose, difficulty to watch or difficulty to want them to do well when you've just stepped out, does that dissipate the more you started to establish the clarity of this is where I'm going with my teaching, with my coaching, the more that you were creating your new identity? Did that make some of those conflicts, if you will, sort of dissipate a little bit more?
I think time's a wonderful healer. So even the other day on Friday, I had a challenging day at work, and there's a certain thing you're like, God, that's massive, that's huge. You're really concerned, but you know now as a grown up, let's give it 24 hours. Let's relax, let's see. And then 24 hours, oh, it's not as big. 40 hours, actually, it's not really big at all. 72 hours, oh, it's absolutely fine. Same here, but it's just taking a lot longer. So time is a big friend to my feelings towards it.
Yeah.
Maybe my loss of memory helps as well. But I think the big thing I think is, and I think they're far better now in sports teams. And I wouldn't pretend to know what's going on in professional sport just now because I'm not detached, but I'm not in those environments very much. I was down in Leicester quite a bit when I was down there in Saints, and I'm going into Edinburgh in a few weeks. But I'm not part of that environment. I think they're far better at bringing everyone together under a shared purpose. Whereas when you don't have that shared purpose, you fill that void. And for a lot of us, it was about you excelling as an individual. So then if you're not playing, it can be quite destructive for that individual. If you're, I was egotistical, probably I could be argued being narcissistic. I was very single-minded, and my identity was all wrapped up in it. So if that's my whole identity, I don't want that person to do well because that's my journey. Whereas there's people that rarely got to play and were the most wonderful team players and so supportive and so amazing because it wasn't the big thing. I think teams are far better now at wrapping everybody in a shared identity and a shared purpose, whether it be an inspire a nation or to make people fall in love with the game, because then it does shape your behaviours and your feelings. Because if the whole point is and our point now at Merchiston is, yes, we're a very good rugby school in terms of the sports side of things, the rugby in particular. And it would be easy for us to just hone in on that and make us even better. But we want the whole of Scottish rugby to grow. We want the whole system to be stronger because we want to produce a stronger Scottish rugby team with ultimately more Scots in the team. There was a game we watched in the Six Nations and there was a lovely move and like 4 or 5 intricate players, and we just noticed that none of them were educated in Scotland. They'd all been externally promoted, and then we went through the team and only a third of the team had come through the Scottish system. Right. So that's not to judge that and say how terrible is that. It's like, well, actually, how can we be part of that solution? So our shared vision shapes how we interact with the circuit, how we interact with other people. And again, we don't always get it right, but that's where we want to get to. So I don't know if I answered your question.
No, it's a great answer. It's a great answer. but it's one of those ongoing challenges because that ruthlessness is common, but you need to have that shared purpose. We're not all lone wolves, and you get into industry, you're in a business, in a team, in an education set, wherever you are, you have to pull together, and it needs some humility and some selflessness in there. So no, it was a great answer, and it's one of those conversations that keeps spinning out. There's so many things to ask, but I suppose if one of the powerful questions, and I sense we'll get some interesting insights from you on this, Nick. If you had that proverbial time machine and you were going back to the younger Nick, what are some of the do's and don'ts, if you will, that you would say that's important for a successful transition? Because I think that's powerful for people who are still involved in it. It doesn't have to be rugby, that's still involved in professional sport. To hear someone with the benefit of hindsight and the wisdom that always comes with hindsight, if you wound the clock back and said, here are some things I did do and I would recommend, or some things I didn't do or should have done, what sort of wisdom would you sort of wrap around this journey that you've been on to help people coming on the path behind you?
So there's 2 parts of me here when I'm talking, and I do believe in multiplicity of the mind. We're not just one in our heads, but we can get that another time. And the 2 parts, one of them is I wouldn't change anything and I wouldn't give any advice because life happens as it happens for a reason. And actually, I'm the person I am today because of exactly how it went. So if I went back and changed something, I wouldn't be where I am now, which is who I am because this is who I am, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
A bit spiritual, a bit bigger picture side of things. If I'm looking at the other part of me is like, no, here's some great lessons you can impart. My ego's like, go. So in terms of advice for transition, I alluded to the start, say yes to opportunities, like go create opportunities, definitely. The other one I would definitely, especially as a young person, and you're earning good money, is to invest, is to get a financial advisor and a financial planner and understand what you can do with your money, because the world's only going one way, which is more unequal, which I'm not a fan of. But actually, it's once you've got assets, you're in a far different position. So if you can use your assets, sweat your assets, and use your money better, come the time when you need to transition, you won't have to rush into anything. So it'll give you time to sit, time to think, time to reflect, even get a life coach or a careers coach, or just go and work for free. But if you're not leveraging what you have now, then you'll be in real trouble at the end. In France, again, use them as an example, they do something called a bilan de compétences, which is they go over like a 3 or 4 month process as you're retiring, where they go through your strengths, your skills, and then help you find a career for you. Now, that's great if you've got the ability to, but a lot of us, it's a career-ending injury. And you then straight away you've just got to suddenly find a way of supporting maybe your family, yourself, or your mortgage, and you might be forced down a path you don't want. So making sure like a third of your money is put aside to be able to transition out.
Yeah, fabulous. What a wonderful answer. And I love the spiritual insight at the start. And that's something I very much believe in, that, you are where you are because of your experiences, good and bad. And so don't change anything. But nonetheless, for the benefit of the people coming behind you, I'm pleased that you did have the second part, because I think there's some wise words in there. Carl, before we start to bring things up, I've got one final thing I want to ask Nick. Is there anything from you that you want to put to Nick?
No, I've been incredibly impressed with this conversation, and I'm very, very happy.
Yeah, likewise.
I think it's been so in depth. It's been so in depth. And like James mentioned, we could go off on so many tangents with some of your answers. It's been fantastic. So no, nothing more from me. I'll just leave it with you, James.
No, well, again, I think a big thank you, echoing what Carl said. It's been really, really insightful, and I'm sure people who are in the process of thinking about the transit, perhaps have stepped out, will find this really powerful. Now, I suppose one final question from me. You talked a lot about the ruthlessness of being in the professional sport, having that North Star. It's very clear. We want to win the Six Nations. We want to win the world. We want to win. Bringing it now to the world you're in, I'm curious how you would frame this. And again, it's a bit of an open question, so apologies for that. But how do you look at success now? I think this is one of the things that I often find with people. They're sort of overwhelmed with, well, what is success? And I always remind people it's very personal. So you're no longer just here to win at the weekend or win the league or win the Six Nations. It is much more nuanced. But now you're in this new space, the coaching, the teaching. How would you articulate success for Nick?
Well, I'll use an exercise I do with other people to try and articulate it. And I think Claire Luckbooth was her name, and apologies if I get this wrong, but she went to visit JFK one day and said, "I'm worried about your legacy." He's like, "What do you mean?" He said, "I think you're trying to do too much. A good man should be summed up in a sentence." And then she gave Abe Lincoln as an example of freed slaves and united the Union, or saved the Union. And kind of I try and find what my sentences are in my different walks of life. So for my children, it's to be their ultimate champion and a voice of positivity, which is the one I'm struggling with most just now, because I'm so tired through this job. And professionally, we want to create a place of forever belonging where boys can find their true self. So that again helps me shape. So success is then quite quantifiable in terms of are kids staying? Are they happy? Or do they come back afterwards? Are they still in touch with the coaches? In terms of wider professional, I want to change the world through coaching. Now that's quite a big statement. And what that looks like on an individual level as you come back down to planet Earth from up here is I'm still figuring that out. So I'm using different vehicles to see how I can change the world. So a colleague and I, we've just set up a rugby camp called Totem, actually, and a big part of that is not rugby. It's the life skills. It's using the biopsycho social stuff that I've learned and continue to learn. It's breath work. It's meditation, mindfulness, to give these young people skills to be resilient, to understand themselves better and go and smash it. Part of what I do is my professional coaching with leaders, because leaders have the biggest impact on people's well-being. So let's work with them to create a better environment. part of it is on an individual level with a one-on-one with an athlete or various things. So you kind of, as I said at the start, what does success look like? Am I making a difference, a positive difference? Yes, to people's lives. On the whole, not everybody. But that I guess that would be my long answer.
Yeah, it's a brilliant answer. I love it. And again, I think the theme of this, it's been insightful, and it's been deep, and it's been very, very insightful for me listening to you. And I think just that final point, even that has so much to unpack, that success is not defined in one very, very narrow niche. You've talked about being a dad, being a coach, being a colleague. There's that diversity. And I think that's important when we're talking about helping people with identity. You're no longer just the professional sportsman or woman. There's much more to it. So there's a lot going on with you, Nick. I mean, is there anywhere that people can learn a bit more about you? Would you like us to mention anything? Are you particularly active on any LinkedIn or anything like that?
I actually came off social media in my playing days because it wasn't good for me. And now
Right.
I'm on LinkedIn. I do stuff, but I'm not very good at it. But the world I'm in, it is coaching, it's education, it's sport, and that's the only place I do stuff. We've actually started a few Instagram things through the school, and I already find myself getting sucked back in, so I need to step back. It's about knowing yourself as best as possible. But yeah, LinkedIn's the best place to find me. I love connecting with people, and I think ideas spark ideas. So if anything sparks an idea in someone, then feel free to reach out, whether professionally or personally. Happy to connect.
Perfect. Well, massive thank you, Nick. Really appreciate your time, and we wish you the very best of luck in all your future endeavours, coaching at the school, and I'm sure there'll be lots of people reaching out and wanting to connect having listened to this. So thanks again for your time.
Cheers, Nick.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us this week on our ATA podcast. If you found this conversation insightful and it resonates with your journey, please subscribe, follow the show, and stay connected with us for more insights, resources, and information on how we at ATA are supporting your preparation for life beyond the game.